Accountability. People, leadership, ethical leadership and accountability are engineered. And the critical aspect of it is, how do you choose leaders? I articulated this thing twice or three before, and somebody tried to make a mockery out of it in a very nonsensical way. The starting point is, who is allowed to be a leader at any level of society? Whether it's a pastor, a teacher, a principal, how much do we make it our business to dig into the background of a person? To avoid having people who are going to molest our children in schools and even as principals. To avoid people assuming managerial and leadership positions in government circles and even in the private sector, who are going to make it conditional to your appointment or elevation, to sleeping with them or undertaking to give them money, however competent you may be. So, here is my suggestion. I have said, all the way up to the presidency, we've got to make sure that funding comes from the state. Elections don't come every month or every year. They come once in a while. Now, because we don't want state capture, we've got to budget whatever number of billions are necessary to distribute among those that deserve to run for political office. You may say, but how are you going to determine? That's what you and I must think about. We must not lazily accept what is already there. What is already there is a product of how far others could go in trying to find a solution. But because we know that system has not worked, nothing stops us from saying, but isn't there another way? Remember when the cell phone was introduced? The first Nokia cell phone was like a traditional weapon. And scientists could easily have said, well, this is the cell phone. What are you looking for? But people kept on thinking, beyond landlines, hello, to cell phone. There is a way. So we've got to creatively say, this thing of people funding whoever they choose to anoint as future ministers, premiers, and presidents doesn't work for Africa. Just as we budget handsomely for other responsibilities, because of the critical nature of elections, we've got to budget very well for it if we are to preserve our future. Because otherwise, it's a question of those who are well-resourced. As empirical studies, particularly in America, have shown, identify, this one is a smart one, and let's groom him or her into a serious leadership position. Once they are there, they will remember that we made them, not the people. As I keep on saying, it no longer becomes a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It becomes a government of the rich, by the rich, and for the rich. So, when the state representing the people have released the resources that facilitates eligibility for public office, then it becomes easier to hold people accountable. If you don't do that, you'll continue to see very impressive election manifestos. Once people are in office, they keep on saying what is there, but not doing it. And you say, but these are smart people. Why can't they do the obvious? What is stopping them from doing what they undertook to do? Money. Come election time, a recalibration of what was said many times before, a massive media campaign and all sorts of paraphernalia that goes with it. And people just get lulled into say, oh, maybe this time around, maybe this time around. It'll never happen. That has been the problem of Africa. That has been the problem of the developing world. And it has become the problem even of the developed world. So you'll never be able to hold them accountable. You'll find this person with a shocking track record. No ethical leadership at all. You are almost certain this person is going to go out. Oh, the person comes back even bolder than ever before. Mama Real Dwaba. Mandela ran a very lucrative legal practice. He and Mr. Oliver Tambo. Very lucrative. He had a choice, and he knew that for him to enjoy the money that comes with being an attorney and the prestige, he had to obey the laws, however oppressive they were, however unjust he knew them to be. And for him to contribute meaningfully towards ending injustice, oppression, and exploitation, he had to say, well, if I starve, so be it. If I die, so be it. That is selfless leadership for you. That is ethical leadership for you. I keep on saying to people, just think about it. People were prepared to die, and many died. People suffered, and some continue to suffer, who were at the forefront of the liberation struggle, black and white. They could have chosen money and positions even in the homeland systems. My schooling was funded by the Buputazwana government. I was a very poor fellow. But I was very clear in my convictions. They would never give me a politically oriented case. I would have refused. But I spoke out as a government employee against the discriminatory practices that were happening even in our office. Because if you were black, you earned less than your white colleague, however junior he or she might be. I said, this is wrong. I was interviewed by the media. I said, this is wrong. And I resigned. When I resigned, I was funding my wife's education at the university. We had a child. I was responsible for the education of my two brothers. And I knew that my pension payout was going to be 8,400. And I was paying a bond for my 4-roomed house in the township. I had to pay for my accommodation doing pupillage here. If I failed, that would have been the end of me and maybe the end of my marriage. But principle dictated that I can't look like I'm colluding. So it's a choice. What ideal do you cherish? What, if any, are you prepared to die for the sake of the suffering masses? I think it will be a joy to die not because I was greedy, which is a problem in this country and around the world, but because I sought to champion the cause of justice regardless of what the loudest in our country choose to say about what I do or say. Detail to explain just how troubled our country and by extension Africa and the rest of the world is. There's a paucity of leadership and therefore alive to the reality that the whole world celebrates commemorates the critical leadership role that the first president of South Africa played, we should pause and reflect and say, but who was Nelson Mandela? What would he expect of every South African? What would he expect of every African and any other person around the world who is a leader? Let me begin by saying each and every one of us is a leader, by the way. Leadership is never really positional. It is functional leadership that matters. And be careful about those who are prepared to do everything, even outside of the book, to ascend to a leadership position. It's never those they claim to seek to represent that they really seek to represent. It is their stomachs and their insatiable appetite for power and money that they seek to satisfy. So I would like to say a few things as briefly as a lawyer cum preacher could say, and allow for some question and answer engagement. For I believe that to resolve our country's key challenges, this moment, the eve of the birthday of Madiba, requires of each and every one of us to reflect on how we could contribute towards the eradication of corruption, all crime, unethical leadership, and poor governance in our country. Things have gone wrong, and we were watching. We were too concerned about our careers, our money-making opportunities, and possibilities to ascend to positions of leadership more than we were, if we were at all, about the plight of the suffering masses of South Africa, of Africa, and the rest of the developing world. So, based on the quotation, Nelson Mandela clearly requires and expects of each and every one of us to have a lifetime commitment to something. So the question is, since he had dedicated his life to a cause, what is it that you have dedicated your life to? I was touched one day. Reverend Matebula sent me a WhatsApp message. And that was at the time when he was or had been to Mozambique, when circumstances cried out for intervention after that cyclone. And I said, but where are other South Africans? Where am I? If we care as much as we often say when we have opportunities to speak, because we know people expect us to say it, where do we find the practical expression of that which we profess? So what are you committed to? He made reference to the struggle, his commitment or his dedication to the struggle of the African people. Until you come to until you grasp the fundamentals of the situation of the African people, you'll never really feel impelled to do anything about their plight. The kind of poverty that obtains in Africa is nauseating. If you are the leader that I believe we all ought to be, you ought to drop a tear from time to time when you reflect deeply and soberly upon the reality that in a continent as well endowed with minerals and natural resources, even fertile soil, as South Africa and Africa, multitudes go to bed on a hungry stomach. You simply have to look at the kind of so-called houses that many of them live in, the level of illiteracy, the exploitation and suffering that happens in South Africa and Africa. What are we doing about it? Where is the commitment? It ill behooves us to gather here today and in the years to come and talk about Nelson Mandela when there is nothing about Nelson Mandela to show in our individual lives, when most of us are actually hiding behind those who are doing something about what needs to be done. So, have you made it your business to soberly reflect on the plight of the African people that Nelson Mandela was talking about? Or have we lulled our consciences to that situation? Does it matter when you pass Khayelitsha, Langa, Alexander, Diepsloot, or any of these places? Does it touch you? Have you allowed it to prick your conscience that these are human beings and none of us ought to allow this to be normalized into what South Africans ought to resign themselves to? So what are we doing about it? If we are to gather like this next year, this time, here or elsewhere, what progress would each and every one of us be able to share as a contribution towards the realization of the aspirations so artfully crafted in the preamble to our Constitution? Have you fully embraced and internalized the fight against injustice, white or black domination? Or do you go along with whatever narrative is put out there in the furtherance of whatever sectional agenda might be there to make others look forever good and others look forever bad? Maybe I should pause there. Part of what we need to grapple with here is corruption. Part of what we have to grapple with in Africa and the rest of the world is corruption. But it looks like we have allowed ourselves to be channeled into believing that corruption can only be in the public sector. Believe you me, it takes two to tango. We will never be able to defeat corruption for as long as we allow ourselves to be choreographed into believing that corruption can only be in the public sector. Or let me be a bit crude about it so that we can really get a root awakening, that it's a black thing. Every human being is capable of being corrupt. And believe you me, I believe we haven't even scratched the surface in relation to the magnitude of the corruption that obtains in the private sector. So, if we are to uproot corruption from South Africa and around the world, we have got to accept as a reality that there are masters of corruption everywhere, even in the Church of God. I mean, the shenanigans that we have seen ought to convince us that human infallibility dictates that you will find corruption anywhere. So we've got to move from the premise that we're going to make it our business, not by others at the expense of others, not to make others untouchable, not to allow anybody, including me, not to allow anybody to be rendered. Why are words running away from me? To be awarded an undeserved saintly status. when you try to scratch the surface about this one, even if indications are there's something there, you will be bombarded with insults and so much negativity that a loud and clear message is sent out that you dare not touch this one. Check. I'm a very frank person, but there are things which when I say, like saying there's corruption in the private sector, which is true. Or there will be one article over the other. It will not deal with what I'm saying, but there will be one sidekick after the other. What would Nelson Mandela do? Nelson Mandela would say, I'm even prepared to die for it. An injustice is an injustice regardless of who the perpetrator is. And we will get this country right if, moving from this meeting, we are determined not to be told who is clean and who is dirty. We are going to research it ourselves, and when there is a smoke, we will follow it up to its logical conclusion. Let me just mention, by the way, what I'm talking about. I read a story from one of the Sunday papers this past Sunday. There was a human being who was projected as nothing but a drunk. I was left believing that this man is always on a high. Nothing positive can ever come out of the mouth of this one. He is a thoroughly discredited person. And I was left wondering, but why did they have to rely on the evidence of this person? That's the narrative that I was fed. Until on Monday, the man appeared on Channel 405. Man was sound. He said, but what was written about me is a lie. And articulated what happened. I'm not saying he was telling the truth. I'm just saying that he didn't strike me as a mad and crazy man who lives in a haze all the time. Sadly, some of the things that we read about other people, some of the things that some of our analysts would like to feed us with are designed to project some in a negative light and others always in a positive light. That is not how to build a nation. Nelson Mandela would never have survived if all South Africans flowed with a negative tide that ran against the cause that he was championing. And I believe that we would do well for the sake of posterity if we were really to take a deep breath. I was touched yesterday morning on Morning Live.
Umukhweng ayekhulumile sekuyenzeka umlando uyayiphinda.